Hello. So in this video, I'm going to describe the grammar of our logical language in explicit terms. So far, I've been a little bit sort of implicit about it, and in this video and the next video, we're going to be very explicit about it. So, our language has a number of symbols. It has the capital letters from P to Z. We call those sentence letters, and those are the atomic sentences. It has the squiggle, the tilde, the negation sign. It has the arrow or the conditional, and it has the left and right parentheses. Those are all the symbols of our logical language so far. We'll be adding more, but right now, that's it. So every sentence of our language is going to be either a letter P to Z or built from these symbols. Okay, so what are the rules then for building sentences, given that we know what the symbols are? So first of all, every sentence letter is a sentence. Great. Secondly, if circle is a sentence, then so is negation circle, which is to say if we have a sentence, then if you put a negation in front of it, that too is a sentence. And if you have two sentences, box and circle, if you put the left parenthesis, and then one of the sentences, and then the arrow, and then the other sentence, and then a parenthesis, you have a new sentence. And nothing else is a sentence. And what are these box and circle symbols? Well, because we want to talk about all sentences, not just the atomic sentences here. So we're going to use box and circle to talk about any sentence whatsoever without prejudice to its being atomic or complex. All right, but these rules have a sort of strange consequence. Consider this P arrow Q. According to those rules, P arrow Q is not a sentence because we have one rule for forming sentences with arrows, and it says there needs to be parentheses, right? They need to start with the parenthesis and end with the parenthesis, but this thing, P arrow Q, doesn't have the parentheses. Well, so that's a problem. We said that P arrow Q before was. So what's going on? How do these rules that I've just laid out relate to what we said before? Okay. Well, so we need to explain how we're going to work with parentheses, right? So it's not a sentence. Officially it is not a sentence because it's missing the parentheses. And as we said before, explained a little bit, why do we need parentheses? To avoid ambiguity. And we can see that when we look at the negation and the conditional. So here are two sentences. One is the one on the left is parenthesis, negation, P, arrow, Q, parenthesis, and the other one just has the negation and then parenthesis, P, arrow, Q, parenthesis. So the first one, that's a conditional, and its antecedent, not P, is a negation. The second one is a negation of the conditional P arrow Q. So those are two different sentences in English. The first, in the logical language, the first one says, not P, that's enough for Q. The second says, P is not enough for Q. Those don't say the same thing. And the parentheses sort of effectively determine which logical symbol is the main connective, which kind of sentence is it? Is it a negation or is it a conditional? Okay, so, but at the same time, we're going to have rules for dropping parentheses. And so far, we're going to have just one rule. The simple rule would be, just get rid of all the parentheses. And the problem with that is that doing that would produce ambiguity, right? So this thing, if we didn't have any parentheses at all in our language, then this symbol or sentence, negation P arrow Q, would be ambiguous. We wouldn't know. Is it a conditional that whose antecedent is negation P, or is it rather a negation of the conditional P arrow Q? The symbols would be ambiguous. We wouldn't know what the negation applies to. Does it apply to the conditional or just the P? And so negation P arrow Q in our rules is not a sentence. The ones we saw before with parentheses are. The first one is the negation of a conditional. The second one is a conditional whose antecedent is the negation of P. Okay, but we're going to have a simpler, more limited rule, which is going to say with informal, we're going to call it informal notation, and with informal notation, we're going to drop parentheses where we don't need them. Okay, so P or Q, is that a sentence of official notation? No, but it is going to turn out to be a sentence of informal notation. So what we said before, the way we've been talking, we were talking in terms of informal notation. Okay, so what is our rule for dropping parentheses to give us informal notation? Well, it's just this. You can drop the final external set of parentheses. So once you're done building a sentence, you can say, okay, well, if my sentence is just the conditional P arrow Q with parentheses around outside of it, then I can drop those parentheses. if I'm done, and that's the whole sentence. Or if my whole sentence is negation P arrow Q with parentheses, if that's the whole thing, then I can drop the parentheses around the whole thing and I just have negation P arrow Q. Or if it's parenthesis, P arrow Q, parenthesis, arrow R parenthesis, okay, I can drop the parentheses around the whole thing. So once you're done building a sentence, once you have the whole thing, you can drop the outside ones because as it turns out, we don't need those. Okay? So if we say that a string of symbols is just some symbols, so this is a string, that's a string, that's a string, some strings are sentences, some aren't, then we have three categories. A string of symbols might be either one, it might be a sentence in official notation. And it's in official notation if it follows those original 4 rules that I laid out. If it follows these rules. If it's produced in this way, every sentence later is a sentence. If circle is a sentence, the negation circle is a sentence. If box and circle sentences, then parenthesis, circle, arrow, box, parenthesis is a sentence and nothing else. If these rules tell us that it's a sentence, then it is. But otherwise, but that's the only way to be a sentence. If a sentence is, what about a sentence being in informal notation? Well, if the thing you have, if you put parentheses back on it, then you would have a sentence in official notation, then it's in informal. So the thing you're looking at, if you say, oh, I could get it by taking parentheses off, then what I'm looking at is informal. So P arrow Q, not produced by the rules, but you can take the parentheses off of the sentence, the parenthesis, P arrow Q, parenthesis, and you get just P arrow Q. That means P arrow Q is in informal notation. And then everything else is not well formed. So if it's by the rules and the rules alone, it's official. If it's by the rules alone, except that we then drop the last pair of parentheses, then it's informal. And if it's neither of those, then it's not well formed. So those are how our rules work. We're going to see in the next video, I'm going to explain this notion of the main connective at more length because it's pretty important. And we're going to learn an activity called parsing, which is a way of breaking a sentence up into its grammatical parts. So we'll see that in the next video.